All right, guys, this is Bill from Linden, Tennessee. So, made a little bit of progress on the Cub Cadet project. By progress, I mean taking things apart. So, is that progress? I guess it's like I used to work with a guy who was like an attention hog, and he'd always try and be funny guy or whatever. But a lot of times, the attention that he received was negative because he was kind of annoying. But we always theorized that negative attention is still attention. So reverse progress in that I'm just taking things apart, I suppose, is still progress. We're still moving towards the goal of being finished, and to get there you have to take stuff apart and make a horrible mess. This is actually I've actually cleaned the garage at least twice since the last video. So what have we done here? Got the bodywork off of the newer one. I still don't really know what number it is, so I don't know what to call it. The 123, the hydrostat, got most of the body work off of it. I don't really know anything about these, but it turns out, I guess, unless I'm missing something, this part is actually welded to the frame. That's kind of annoying for my purpose. This is what's considered a narrow frame. I do know that much. So if you look at that frame and then you compare it to that one, this one is wider. So yeah, the narrow frame has that center hump welded to it, so I'm going to have to cut that off because that's not doing me any favors at all. I think since I'm wanting to put a front end loader on this thing, I'm going to use this half as the front because it has a thicker frame through here, which will be much better for putting a front end loader on it. And having said that, we'll get to that in a minute. So that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this one as the front. Now, obviously, I'm not going to need any of this steering or any of this mechanism. I'm going to cut, like I said before, probably going to section that frame between those two marks and just move this front part back. The reason I want to do that, not only because it's a little bit rigider than the narrow frame. Of course, I could make the narrow frame rigider, but it is wider, and I guess I could make the narrow frame wider if I wanted to, but that sort of defeats the purpose. So this right here is a mock-up of a Tesla battery module. The actual Tesla battery module is right there, two of them. Each of those are 5.5 kilowatt hours. Oh, this is new information. Yeah, this is going to be electric. Sorry, the last one I didn't mention that. This is going to be electric. Yeah, we're not having sticky old engines and all that stuff in it. It's going to have a electric motor pushing this. It's about a 20 horse, maybe 10 horse continuous electric motor, 48 volt. It's got about 80 foot-pounds of torque. And if we zoom over here, that's it. That's the electric motor. We'll see that a little bit better later. Not the thing on the bottom. That's also an electric motor. This part. This is a 1 horse, just 110 single phase motor. That is a 20 horse peak 3-phase AC induction motor. So anyway, we'll get into that later. But excuse me. Yeah, Tesla module. Tesla modules, and the Tesla modules fit much better in the wide frame than they do in the narrow. Now I could just as easily modify the narrow frame. That's probably something you're going to hear me say a lot throughout this thing. Is like, well, I could just modify this and make it work, but I kind of like to not do that if I had to. I'd rather just sort of keep things the way they are and make it work with what I've got. Because, I mean, honestly, I could just go buy a bunch of steel and make it myself. So, the hydrostat, the 123 here, got the transmission out of it and put a drill to it. I got a little drive shaft. It's a 5/8 drive shaft, and I turned one end down to 1/2 inch so I could put it in my drill, and then just put a coupler on the other end, and then coupled that to the transfer case. Of course, I had it sitting down flat, and spun it. It didn't work. Doesn't go. The rear axles are actually locked. Like they spin now, but that's just through the differential. If you try and spin them both together, you can't do it by hand. I suspect that the brakes are just stuck. That kind of explains why it was so difficult to push the stinking thing in here. So the brakes are probably stuck. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to take the hydro part of the hydrostat off, which is this part. Apparently, this part is the pump. This is the first stage pump, and I guess this pump sucks fluid from the reservoir, from the differential. All the fluids down there, sucks fluid through there, through some hoses, goes through the filter, goes into the pump, and that pump provides so many 100 psi to the actual second pump, which is on this side, and this is a variable displacement pump. And by that I mean it can vary its output from forward bias, I guess you'd call it forward bias, maximum psi to this half, which is the hydraulic motor. So if you have the shifter forward, then it'll have a forward bias through the internal passages and stuff into the hydraulic motor, and it'll turn it in the direction that you need so you can have forward motion. And if you flip the lever in the middle, then this pumps into this one, but this one doesn't do anything, and I guess it all just circulates back into the sump. And then if you rotate the valve backwards so that you want to go in reverse, this thing reverse biases the flow of oil, hydraulic fluid, through the hydraulic motor and turns everything so that you can go backwards. This particular transmission has internal brakes. I don't exactly know how those work, other than they work right now. They're locked. Anyway, the hydrostatic part doesn't work. I took these hydraulic lines off, and some ooey gooey nasty came out of there. It was pretty gross. And so maybe it would work if it just had good clean fluid in it and I took that filter off. I don't know. But what I do know is I don't really even want a hydrostat. Problem with a hydrostat, in particular with an electric motor, is that you always have to have the thing spinning to maintain that pressure in the primary pump to get to the secondary one so that you can do something. And if I was going to use it in a selectable scenario, which is kind of what I was thinking of, that I'd have it just so whenever I'm going forward and the tires are, I'm stuck. Let's say I'm trying to pull something heavy and I can't get no traction, then I can just push the lever forward and it'll give me forward torque through the hydrostatic system that I just kind of described. Yeah, but I think if I didn't have the thing pushing forward to actually drive, this front pump is still going to be consuming some amount of power from the electric motor, which is obviously taking energy from my battery, and that's not good. So it'd be much better to possibly direct drive this thing. So after it comes out of the hydraulic motor, it just goes into a pinion. It goes into a very small pinion that goes to a big gear, and that big gear is splined to the pinion gear of the rear differential. At some point I'll have this thing apart and you can see that. Or you can just, if you're really interested, you can just go on YouTube and find some pictures. And so what I might be able to do, what I'm hoping to do, what I can do, what I will do, I think, is I'll take this whole hydrostat part off and expose the splines of that little pinion gear and somehow couple to that. I may have to make like a plate and a seal and stuff so this doesn't make a mess, but somehow couple to that, and then with the motor just direct drive that pinion through the gear reduction into the rear differential, and my electric motor will have plenty of torque to move me along, no problemo. And then with the manual transmission one, if that manual transmission has a 1-to-1 gear, then I can just permanently set it in that gear, and then this will just be a permanent four-wheel drive thing. Or something else I was thinking about is maybe try and find a transfer case from like a side-by-side and maybe have a selectable transfer case, and that would be kind of cool because it would be locked, so whenever you put it in four-wheel drive, it would lock that center differential. And yeah, there's more to talk about center differentials. You got to have one, just the same reason why you have to have a differential on your drive axle. Whenever you go around a corner, the outside tire turns faster than the inside tire. So you have to have some sort of a way to compensate for that different in tire speeds. If you don't have that, maybe you've seen some four-wheelers. Whenever you turn four-wheelers, you have to like lean heavily towards the outside wheel so that the inside wheel can kind of spin out. Is basically what's happening. And that's fine in a four-wheeler, but it's not so hot when you're trying to pull a lawnmower and you got some knobbly tires and you don't want to tear up your grass. So you got to have a differential on any driven wheel. Front axle, rear axle, anything has to have a differential. Now those differentials come in all sorts of flavors and shapes and stuff, especially in cars and four-wheelers and Jeeps. Ask me about Jeeps. But as far as I can tell, in these Cub Cadets, you can't actually get a locking differential or a limited slip differential, which is a shame because that's what I'd really like to have. But anyway, same goes for a center differential between the front and the rear driving axles. You have to have a center differential for the same reason. Whenever you go around a turn, say you go around a right turn, the front drive axle is going around a larger arc than the rear drive axle. So the front drive axle actually has to spin faster than the back one. So you have to have that differential between them. Now you can get away with it, no problem, on grass or in gravel or something like that, and that's just fine. But again, it isn't good for the grass. So I want to be able to do good things for the grass. And I'd kind of like to be able to not have it in four-wheel drive all the time because it's just not necessary for the majority of the time. So if I can get a side-by-side transfer case, if such a thing exists, or maybe a small, like divorced, is what they call it, a divorced transfer case, in that it doesn't bolt to a transmission, they call it divorced. If I get a small divorced transfer case, maybe out of like a Suzuki Samurai or something like that, then not only will I have selectable four-wheel drive, I might have a high and a low range, which would be kind of cool. But anyway, so that's where we're at now. Just making a mess. The whole garage smells like this nasty hydraulic fluid. But it's kind of not really my favorite part of doing this. It's just nasty. It's just dirty. And I had to cut, to get this thing apart, I had to cut the little shifter handle, the little shift selector. This was on the dashboard. That's for like forward and reverse. I had to cut that off. I had to cut some linkage underneath of it because all the cotter pins are stuck. I can't get a cotter pin out. You can't even reach inside this thing. I can't believe this cover doesn't come off. Maybe somebody in the comments will tell me, hey, dummy, you do take the cover off. But I haven't figured out how to do it. I think it's welded on there. Anyway, pain in the butt. These must have been a nightmare to assemble. I don't know how they did it. Anywho, so that's where we're at. So from now on, from here on, I'm going to just be continuing the disassembly process. And we'll just see how this thing goes. So, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.